Welcome back. This video will cover part 2 of chapter 12, Developmental Psychology for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. What are your opportunities with a graduate degree in developmental psychology? Well, one area, and this won't seem, and it doesn't seem at all, directly related to developmental psychology is being a grant director. Many nonprofit organizations are funded through grants, and that includes organizations like that are focused on issues related to developmental psychology. Grant directors, their work is in so the grant director is going to work for an organization that has money to give, and then nonprofits are going to seek out that funding. So the grant director is going to read and analyze proposals and decide which proposals are the most suitable for that year's funding opportunities. They're going to oversee funding activities. If it's a very large organization, grants are going to be one of the departments in that organization. Grant directors often work with management and board members of their organization to create special funding opportunities, to put out requests for proposals around the funding calendar. They will also oversee a staff typically, and that staff is going to present proposals to them and coordinate with organizations, getting additional information, communicating about awarding funding, tracking payments, etc. Grant directors often give presentations to supervisors and to potential applicants who are looking for funding from their organization. Foundation directors are executive level positions in an organization that's typically a nonprofit foundation. So like the Gates Foundation, for example, has probably multiple foundation directors in different segments of that foundation. These are, as I said, executive level positions. Why is this connected to developmental psychology? There are lots of foundations that are associated with children's and the issues of children and adolescents. There are also lots of foundations that are associated with issues related to midlife and old age. So for people with interest in developmental psychology who have that sort of business acumen, they may find it attractive to move in the direction of being a foundation director. The director is going to be the executive in charge of all of the organization's activities. They'll have lots of people underneath them who are doing the day-to-day work, but basically the director is the person who's fully in charge at the end of the day. They will be responsible for setting goals and strategies in concert with their board, having a mission statement, and then they'll need to make sure that the goals get met. They will hire staff, make sure that they're trained. They'll be in the oversight position over program development and implementation. These can be, really well-paid positions. In 2023, foundation directors and executive directors had a median salary of about $185,000, but the salaries really range depending on the size of the organization. A foundation director of an extremely large organization is likely to make far, far more than that median, whereas the executive director of a very small nonprofit isn't going to make anywhere close to that much. Beyond salary, foundation directors ultimately are responsible for budget. They will likely have a staff member who is responsible for the accounting, but, at the bottom, the director is in charge of the money. In very large organizations, they're going to oversee other administrators and managers in various respects. There are also consultants, and here the through line to developmental psychology is more obvious. developmental psychologists who work in the applied space often work as consultants who give advice to companies and organizations as they are designing products for people with at different ages. So they may be involved in toy design, educational material design. They may be designing, consulting in the design of furniture. If you're talking about people with disabilities, they may be working with a developmental psychologist to create living spaces, to create tools and other sorts of things, mobility devices that help those individuals at a developmentally appropriate level. So these consultants really provide their expertise. You could kind of think of them as subject matter experts. They're putting their expertise into the discussion of how appropriate a particular product or software design is for a given age group. So, a software company that's designing educational software will definitely want to consult with a developmental specialist to make sure that the language level, for example, that they're using is appropriate for the audience. They may want to design situations in their software that are targeted appropriately to the age level of those individuals. As consultants, they may do focus groups, product testing, getting a gauge on how, let's say they're looking at toys. They may do focus groups with kids and families to get the kids document their activities with the toy, give feedback about the toy, and then provide that feedback to the designers to improve the toys, how they function. Developmental psychologists may also be involved in market research, especially if there are age-specific audiences that are being talked to. In that role, they're going to advise companies in the media that they produce. So, programs like Sesame Street, for example, they have consultants who are developmental specialists as well as educational specialists on staff who provide advice and evaluation when creating media for kids. They may be engaged in helping companies market products to adults. Adults often are buying for kids and adolescents, so marketing may need to go to the adults. But they're also involved in marketing specific kinds of products to adults because there are some developmental psychologists who study specifically in that area. Product development and marketing consultants work in a variety of different settings. They may work directly for companies and consulting firms, but they may also be in private practice. We've talked about user experience design in a previous chapter. This puts a little bit of a different lens on it. In some cases, you have people with developmental expertise who are also interested in that technology space. They'll use their experience as developmentalists to design apps, websites, software products that are accessible and that function easily and are attractive. Now, why would a developmentalist be important here? Having some experience with, my aging parent and, all of my friends, we're all about the same age and we have aging parents. Watching them struggle with smartphones and other kinds of technology is frequently painful. And, just watching it, I'm like, if they would just do this, if they would change this aspect of this app, it would be so much easier for someone who, say, can't read very, very small font to use. So, simple tweaks like that, changing font sizes, changing the number of clicks that are required for information to be accessed can be really helpful. Or if apps or websites, software products are designed for kids versus adolescents versus adults, how those packages need to be changed so that they are easily accessible for those populations. Added to that, you have the whole area of developmental disabilities. How do we design products for that population that are actually usable for them? User interface designers are the people who design how apps are laid out, how they look. So like the example I gave you, if the font size was larger, or there were fewer clicks to create an outcome, that can make a difference for a user, a difference between them actually being able to successfully use it versus not. When my mother-in-law was in memory care, one of the insurance organizations that was providing services for her sent us this tablet that she was supposed to use to access information about her own care. Now, this was kind of silly because this was a person who was no longer capable of reading. She had dementia. She couldn't use a tablet if her life depended on it. Even years before that, I played with the device and I was like, I can't use this. It's really confusing. How would a person who is memory impaired hope to use it? So that's what user interface designers are supposed to do in concert with web developers, app developers, programmers, and software designers. They have to create an interface that is tailored to the developmental level of the person using the device. Developmental psychologists might work in either of these roles as consultants, and depending on their skills in these areas, they may actually be creating websites, apps, video games, and so on. I read a story several years ago about a game design company, and they were primarily working in the space of first-person shooter games, but they had this offshoot, which seems really kind of weird now that I think about it. But they wanted to design a different kind of first-person game. They wanted a game that was more focused on collaboration and cooperation, and they wanted to target the market of preteens and middle school age people. So they brought in developmental consultants who talked to them about everything from moral development to social development and so on. And they really worked to build characters that they felt would identify, be characters that their audience would identify with and that they would engage with long term. So that's an example of pulling in a developmental consultant. With interface design, developmental psychologists might use their understanding of cognition to critically evaluate the layout of a game, to look at the buttons, to look at what needs to be pressed or swiped or tapped, and so on, making sure that the visual interface is usable for the person. Software products, as I mentioned before, can also be targeted at older adults, and developmental psychologists and gerontology specialists can be very helpful in informing designers who are often, let's be honest, young people. They may not have the kind of experience and knowledge to help them understand the perspective of an older user. Applied developmental psychologists work in a bunch of non-academic settings. So when your authors talk about everyday settings, they mean anything that's not in academia. They may work in medicine, in medical facilities, in schools, social service agencies. They may also be in private practice. And that private practice side is largely in the area of consulting. So these are developmental specialists who may consult with educational organizations designed to give teachers information about things like, say, behavior management or bullying prevention or public health uh, goals in that school setting. I have a colleague who I went to graduate school with. She's a developmental psychologist. She works in academia primarily, but also does consulting with schools, K through 12 schools. And her area of expertise is in bullying and violence prevention. So when she comes in and consults, what she's doing is taking all of her research expertise in those domains and saying, based on your population in your school, given the demographics, the environment, the community that surrounds it, here are the recommendations for the kinds of programs that are likely to move the needle on things like bullying and violence in your environment. They may be involved in conducting assessments, and this is where you get into that gray area of service provision. So you may have an applied developmental psychologist who is also trained in doing testing and assessment. Working one-on-one with kids who have experienced injuries or are potentially have developmental disabilities. There are positions where people with an advanced degree in developmental psychology have additional specialized training so that they can do testing and assessment. In hospital and service settings, these developmental psychologists are going to be embedded within a team. So they may work with doctors, social workers, physical therapists, other kinds of professionals to determine best courses of treatment. They may work in evaluation research as well. So that's more on the research side. Now, the applied developmental psychologists who are working in that service area, you have to be mindful of what kind of things are going to get you the training that you need to deliver those services. So in some master's degree programs, if you want to do that kind of developmental assessment work, you can do it with a master's degree under the supervision of a licensed psychologist. It varies state to state exactly what's required for that kind of work. So you really need to do some background looking for exactly what kind of preparation you need. The doctoral degree in developmental psychology can increase the likelihood that you're able to independently consult. So in some states, you can actually seek licensure as an applied developmentalist, where you can do those assessment activities and provide services. Applied developmental psychologists who want to seek licensure, they're likely to be required to have some cross-training in clinical and counseling psychology to ensure that they have the necessary background. Again, it varies from state to state, but most states are going to require a degree from an APA accredited program. So if you're interested in this area of practice, you can find PhD programs in applied developmental psychology that prepare students specifically to achieve licensure to do that kind of work. So you have to make sure that the program that you're looking at actually does that. And that concludes my coverage of developmental psychology.